All right, we're gonna start out with salt. I'm gonna use some of this color that I mixed over here because I already splattered some over this way, so that will help me to not get too much funny color mixing going on. When I'm using salt, I'm gonna use it where the color is wet. So I'm gonna just paint sort of a flat wash here. I'm gonna make it nice and wet though. I'm not gonna worry too much about the saturation because it kind of evens out itself, but it also, the salt is gonna change a lot. So open up my salt, pour myself a little tiny pinch, and I'm gonna start sprinkling it on. And you can see that the salt is starting to pull the pigment into the sections where it is, and when it dries, it's gonna look really cool. So just add a little bit more. That looks good. We'll see what happens when it dries. I have extra salt. If I was gonna cook with this salt, I would not put it back, but I don't really cook with salt, so I'm gonna put it right back because this is just for art. Dry brush. The term dry brush can be misleading because it sounds like you don't need water. You do still need some water. I'm going to use the fan brush for this because it's a really fun tool. There are such a skinny row of bristles here that with the dry brush technique, this is really fun. So I'm going to get it wet first, and then I'm going to pick a color. See, we haven't used very much red, so I'm going to go into my red, and I'm going to soak up some color. So to get the dry brush technique, I want to sort of dab out some of this color. So it's another time where you can use your towel and just take away some of that water. Now, when you paint on here, you can get some really cool textures. This fan brush gives me this extra fun texture, so I really like it. Because there's not very much water, I'm seeing a lot of the tooth of the page. The tooth is the texture on the paper, so I'm seeing some of that tooth show through. Versus if I were to paint with really nice wet, you can see like I did here, this little touch here, that little touch is not showing the tooth of the page. Dry brush is really fun for creating something that looks like a waterfall or some texture in rocks or something like that. You can be creative with it. I'm going to clean off my fan brush, and we're going to go into using sponges. Sponges are really fun. Again, we want to start with one that's wet. So I have already wet it. You can see it's not like dripping if I squeeze it. So right now I've just wet it again, and I'm going to squeeze out all of that excess water. So maybe kind of like I did with the dry brush. So now you can see, just in case, that if I squeeze it, no water comes out, but it's damp. I'm going to pick a color. I'm going to actually pick two colors here. So I'm going to do some orange on one side, and I'm going to do some red on the other side. And now that I have those two colors here, I'm just going to start stamping. If I stamp in a more irregular fashion, I'm going to get different kinds of mixtures of those colors. If I stamp in the same way each time, I'm going to get sort of a pattern. This is also going to show some of the page through, which is one of the reasons why it's kind of fun. I'm going to get a little bit more orange on here. I think I'm good on red, but you can see that there's another technique. So instead of just stamping it, you can sort of like drag it, and it creates another new texture. I like to do little swirls, and then makes little orbs and stuff, depending on how careful you are. You can sort of draw with it to make different kinds of sort of looking like 3D spaces if you use two colors. You can use more than two colors depending on this surface area of your sponge. Again, make sure that this is not very wet. Wet enough that you can squeeze it, but dry enough that there's no water seeping out. If you use too much water, it's just going to create sort of a wet on wet look. All right, scratching. Scratching is another fun technique. We're going to use some of our clay tools for this. I'm going to use this one. When you're scratching on the paper, you're going to start out with like a flat wash. I'm going to use the same color that I used from splatter again, because again I have that splatter dipping into this area. Alright, so if I want to add a little more pigment, for this I would like a nice smooth kind of flat wash. but it doesn't matter a lot. All right, remember, if I go too many times over the page, then I can kind of tear the page, and I don't want to do that. So now I'm going to take this. It is not a very sharp tool. It's probably not going to cut me if I'm careful, but do be careful because it does have a pretty sharp point. And while it's still wet, I'm going to sort of draw into the surface, and you can see it starting to make the pigment darker in those spots. So you can be pretty specific if you're careful, and you can use this to write words, which is otherwise sometimes kind of difficult to do. All right, last but not least, I'm going to show you how to use cling wrap. Let's use a new color. We have not used very much orange, so I'm going to try some orange here. Actually, I'm going to do a kind of a wet on wet with the cling wrap. So I'm going to start with a little bit of an orange wash, but nice wet color. And I'm going to add some red to it. All right, I would like this to be nice and wet for the cling wrap. So I'm gonna make sure that there's a lot of water on there. I get my cling wrap. So this stuff is really sticky and difficult to use, but that is okay for this. So for this, I'm going to lay it on, and I'm gonna kind of crinkle it on purpose. You can see it makes these kind of ice-looking shapes. I need to leave this on here until it's dry. So I'm gonna stick it on in a way that I know it's gonna hold. I'm gonna let that dry, and I will show you more of what that looks like after it's dry.